many countries around the world, there are minorities and sometimes Aboriginal peoples who are living at the fringes of our societies. These populations have not turned the corner on education and have been left behind. They usually have large families starting early in life, usually unemployed or do menial work, and the vast majority of them live under very poor conditions and often are despised by societies at large. How can these populations feel they belong to our modern societies as well? What can we, ordinary people, do to facilitate this? Let me read you a short story. Stories have magic. Although this is a true story, it is still magical. The story is about a young Roma mother in one of the poorest parts of Hungary, in a village called Nagyecset, and her little daughter. Little Jasmine was 5 years old when her mother, Erzsike, embarked on an adventure. She had been invited to join a group of mothers who were reading stories. She was curious, but also a bit afraid to read in front of others. She had dropped out of school 10 years earlier. Finally, she decided to go and see. She sat there very quiet and afraid, just listening as some other mothers in the group read the story. The facilitator gently asked some questions. Erzsike herself answered some of them and found it amazing that there was a hidden message in every story that could be analyzed. At the end of the session, they were told that they could take the book home to read to their children. You can imagine Jasmine's joy when her mother arrived home with the colorful storybook. Erzsike had to sit down and read to curious, excited Jasmine many times, over and over. She wanted to hear the story. The following week, Erzsike decided to go to the session again. There was a new book waiting for them. This time, having found her voice and her courage, she volunteered to read a paragraph. She made a few mistakes, but was encouraged and read again when her turn came up. By the end of the project, little Jasmine knew many stories by heart and could choose any of them to look at from her home library. She took the books to the kindergarten with much pride to have her teacher to read to other children as well. You know, prior to this, little Jasmine had been living in 2 different worlds, one with her parents in the Roma community, and the other at the kindergarten, where all the adults were different and the atmosphere alien. The only link between these 2 worlds for her had been the books she started bringing from home. But the most exciting time for Jasmine came one afternoon, when her mother came right into the classroom to read stories to the children. When Erzsike started to read the story and ask questions about it, little Jasmine was too proud for words. For the first time, these 2 very different worlds in which she had been living became one. And she started to feel like this was really her world too. Jasmine's mother, like most of the other mothers in the group, soon became aware of their own capacities and enrolled back into school to further her education. She progressed so much that she was chosen to lead a Your Story group herself. The former unemployed Erzsike is now working as a European Roma mediator. Her intention is to eventually get her college degree. Now, seeing her mother as a role model, little Jasmine has become an outstanding student at school. She has won many prizes in various competitions of storytelling, language, and literature. The storybooks had played their magic in transforming the life of a young mother and consequently that of her young child. What do we learn from this story? My personal learning is that there are vast untapped possibilities that can change our societies and our lives if we look out of our boxes and act. What we are used to here is that Roma children are ill-prepared for school system and that their parents don't show any interest. The repeated experience of discrimination and their consequent failure in the school system has left them with a negative association with books and formal education, which is naturally passed on to their children, perpetuating a vicious cycle which many in the majority society would interpret as a sign of laziness or low intelligence. The idea of changing this association using stories came when my husband and I read about research that showed a clear link between reading stories to young children and their later success in school system. I started with a small group of Roma mothers, brought in interesting storybooks, children's storybooks, and practiced with them reading and discussing. I realized the mothers enjoyed these books themselves. In a way, they relived their own childhood, which had been deprived of books like these. Their homework was to take these books home and to read it to their children every night. Within a few months, their reading became fluent, and their level of expression and interest markedly increased. The children, who were waiting eagerly every week for a new book to come, benefited from the project not only because they developed cognitively through skills of language, vocabulary, imagination, concentration, or critical thinking, but also significantly through emotional gains. Their mothers had gained self-esteem and had grown in parenting skills. This small project soon became recognized by many supporters and organizers through whose help it became possible to spread it to many villages in Hungary. By now, the project has gone beyond the borders of Hungary into 5 other countries, impacting the lives of hundreds of mothers and thousands of children. Eldridge Cleaver once said, "If you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem." I believe any form of discrimination that leads to separation and injustice between people is harmful and indeed dangerous. Ervin László, a Hungarian philosopher, has put it very nicely. Our separateness is an illusion. We are interconnected parts of the whole. I believe the plight of the minorities is our collective plight. We, the majority, wherever we live, can and should rise to the challenge of equality. Meséd, your story was a small step towards this, but it has taken a life of its own, and it has been carried forward by many, many others far beyond my original wishes or hopes. I encourage you all to step out of your comfort zone and usual ways of thinking, to stretch into the lives of those who seem separate from you or strange to you, to make connection with them, not with a posture of teaching or helping them, but for the purpose of making friends with an openness to learn. There's much we can learn from each other, and our lives will be much richer if we let go of our imaginary and ingrained attitudes of superiority. In the words of Baha'u'llah, the earth is but one country, and humankind its citizen. Thank you.